January 1943. The Atlantic was a frozen expanse, gray waves crashing against the steel hull of U-575. The night was thick with fog, a choking silence broken only by the low hum of diesel engines and the occasional slap of water against the conning tower. Captain Helmut Rosenberg peered through the periscope, his breath fogging the glass, eyes straining for any hint of the convoy he had been shadowing for hours. Somewhere in the darkness, the faint rhythm of propellers hinted at unseen ships. But tonight, something was different. A sudden, distant ping echoed through the submarine's hull. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Instruments, carefully calibrated to detect depth charges, trembled against the vibrations. It was no ordinary sonar sweep. The submarine shuddered. A torpedo, guided not by sight but by sound, had found them. Panic was silent but palpable. Even the seasoned crew felt the chill of inevitability. The ocean had become a hunter's domain, and their U-boat, once the predator, was now prey. The Atlantic night stretched endlessly, but for Rosenberg and his crew, every second carried the weight of survival. In the shadows, war itself had evolved, and they were among the first to realize the terror of a weapon that listened. The threat of these new torpedoes would soon reshape the war beneath the waves, forcing the German Navy to confront a danger that no depth, no skill could entirely escape. By early 1940, the Atlantic Ocean had become a stage of strategic chess between two powers. The German Kriegsmarine, still rebuilding after the Treaty of Versailles had restricted its naval ambitions, had focused its strength on submarines. These U-boats, sleek, silent, and efficient, were designed to strangle Britain's lifeline. Every ship that carried coal, food, or war material became a potential target. For the German High Command, unrestricted submarine warfare promised to cripple the Allied supply chain before the United States could intervene in force. The early campaigns were brutal in their efficiency. U-boat wolf packs prowled the North Atlantic, moving in coordinated groups to attack convoys. Tactics had evolved from solitary hunting to meticulously planned assaults where submarines would shadow convoys for hours, communicating through encrypted radio messages. Each submarine was a predator, each convoy a moving fortress to be tested, probed, and broken. By the summer of 1941, U-boats were sinking thousands of tons of Allied shipping per month. Merchant mariners and naval escorts alike began to regard the Atlantic not merely as a theater of war, but as a graveyard of steel and salt. Yet, despite the successes, cracks were appearing. The Allies had begun developing countermeasures. Convoys were escorted with destroyers and corvettes, equipped with depth charges and sonar systems capable of detecting submarines beneath the waves. The Germans had learned to adapt, improving torpedo technology, streamlining operations, and exploiting gaps in convoy defenses. But for all the skill and ingenuity of the Kriegsmarine, a fundamental vulnerability remained. The U-boat was designed for stealth, not for detecting a weapon that could track it by sound. The Atlantic environment itself favored the hunter. Cold water, variable thermoclines, and the ever-present fog created conditions in which sonar and hydrophones could be both an advantage and a hazard. German engineers had developed advanced hydrophones and passive listening devices, allowing submariners to detect distant ships with eerie precision. Captains relied on instinct, training, and the subtle vibrations of the hull to anticipate attacks and position their torpedoes for maximum effect. But the war at sea was accelerating. By late 1942, the Allies had increased convoy sizes, enhanced escort training, and refined anti-submarine tactics. Air patrols from escort carriers expanded coverage, and intelligence breakthroughs, including the breaking of the Enigma codes, meant that the Germans could no longer operate in total secrecy. Every U-boat that left port carried with it the weight of strategic desperation. Sink enough tonnage to maintain the blockade, or risk being hunted relentlessly across the Atlantic. German submariners believed they had mastered the game of cat and mouse. They had honed their craft over years of combat, adapting to evolving threats, navigating minefields, and exploiting weaknesses in Allied technology. The confidence of experienced crews like those on U-575 or U-99 was palpable. The Atlantic seemed, in many ways, under their control. For a moment, the Predator truly felt untouchable. Yet beneath this confidence, an invisible transformation was already underway. Scientists and engineers across the Atlantic were experimenting with a new idea: torpedoes that did not rely on sight, luck, or traditional targeting methods. These weapons could home in on sound, the rhythmic pulse of engines, the vibrations of a propeller slicing through water, the very signature of life aboard U-boat. It was an innovation that, if successful, would render every lesson learned by German submariners both vital and suddenly obsolete. The stage was set. The U-boats dominated the surface war, but an unseen, intelligent hunter was emerging, a weapon that would not tire, not falter, and could detect a submarine with terrifying accuracy. As winter storms battered the Atlantic, the Kriegsmarine prepared for another season of hunting. They were unaware that, in laboratories thousands of miles away, the rules of engagement were about to change forever. This growing tension between German mastery and Allied innovation would soon erupt in encounters that changed the course of undersea warfare. By mid-1942, the Allies faced the grim reality of the Atlantic. U-boats were sinking merchant ships at a staggering rate, threatening to starve Britain into submission. Conventional anti-submarine tactics, depth charges, convoy escorts, and air patrols had slowed the losses but could not eliminate them. The Allies needed a weapon capable of striking beneath the waves with precision, a weapon that could hunt the hunter. In laboratories along the eastern seaboard of the United States and in secret British facilities, engineers and scientists were pushing the boundaries of naval warfare. The United States Navy, drawing on lessons learned from previous torpedo failures and battlefield experience, developed a revolutionary concept: the acoustic homing torpedo. Unlike conventional torpedoes, which followed a straight line or relied on preset angles, these new weapons could listen. They were designed to detect the unmistakable vibrations of a ship's propeller and course-correct mid-run, seeking out the noise until impact. The most famous of these innovations was the Mark 24, codenamed Fido. Compact yet lethal, Fido was engineered for deployment from aircraft, capable of seeking out submerged submarines. Passive hydrophones within the torpedo converted sound into motion, guiding the weapon with a deadly, almost intelligent persistence. Tests conducted off the coast of Maine and in British harbors proved the concept. The torpedo would lock onto even stealthy targets, ignoring decoys, relying solely on the acoustic signature of the vessel. British engineers worked in parallel, developing adaptations for their own aircraft and surface ships. The Royal Navy focused on fine-tuning homing sensitivity to account for different submarine designs and variable ocean acoustics. Convoys could now carry not only depth charges and sonar-equipped escorts, but a weapon that acted autonomously, patrolling the ocean in search of the faintest whisper of German steel. These programs were shrouded in secrecy, as the effectiveness of acoustic torpedoes relied on the Germans remaining unaware. Operational security was paramount. By late 1942, production of these torpedoes increased, and the first combat-ready batches were deployed in the Atlantic. Patrol aircraft from the United States and Britain began ferrying the torpedoes across convoy routes, dropping them when submarine contacts were suspected. The first tests against live targets confirmed the nightmare scenario that would haunt the Kriegsmarine. U-boats could no longer assume that a submerged, silent position guaranteed safety. The ocean had gained a new sense, one that listened for movement, location, and sound, and responded with lethal precision. The introduction of acoustic homing torpedoes marked a turning point in undersea warfare. For German submariners, the hunter had become the hunted in a profoundly personal way. Experienced captains, long accustomed to stalking convoys in darkness, began to face a reality they could not outmaneuver. Every engine hum, every propeller whirl, became a potential beacon for death. The very tactics that had once guaranteed their advantage, the stealthy approach, the reliance on silent running, the careful positioning of torpedoes, were suddenly vulnerable to detection. Intelligence reports and intercepted communications soon indicated unusual losses. U-boats that had survived depth charge attacks were being destroyed without warning. Submarine logs spoke of torpedoes appearing from nowhere, homing relentlessly, indifferent to evasive maneuvers. The German High Command could sense the shift, but could not immediately identify the technology behind it. The Allies' acoustic torpedoes were not just weapons. They were psychological tools, eroding the confidence of the Kriegsmarine at every level. By the winter of 1942 to 1943, the Atlantic had transformed into a new kind of battlefield. Wolf packs that once struck with confidence now moved cautiously, aware that the water itself might betray them. The introduction of homing torpedoes was not merely a technological innovation. It was a strategic revelation. It demonstrated that the Allies were capable not only of countering the U-boat menace, but of reshaping the rules of naval engagement. The stage was now fully set for the first deadly encounters. German submariners would confront a weapon that could hunt them by sound, and the consequences of that meeting would echo across the Atlantic. For the men of the Kriegsmarine, life aboard a U-boat had always been a delicate balance of courage and endurance. Submerged for days, confined in narrow steel corridors, they had learned to navigate not only the Atlantic's treacherous waters, but the unspoken psychology of constant danger. Yet nothing could have prepared them for the terror inspired by torpedoes that hunted by sound. Captain Helmut Rosenberg, commanding U-575, described the sensation in his war diary. The ocean itself became our enemy. Every engine's pulse, every creak of steel felt like a heartbeat counting down to our end. Unlike depth charges, which detonated with violent, unmistakable force and allowed some chance of evasive action, acoustic torpedoes were invisible and unrelenting. They could strike silently, leaving no warning, no escape. Crew members reported sleepless nights, gripping rails and listening for the faintest vibration in the hull. Engineers, trained in the precise monitoring of gauges, found themselves listening in vain as instruments provided little defense. Even seasoned veterans felt the creeping anxiety of unpredictability. The psychological toll was immense. Every convoy approached with caution, every maneuver executed with heightened tension. Fatigue, fear, and the awareness of being hunted by a weapon that listened undermined the confidence that had once been their greatest asset. Some men attempted to cope through routines, maintaining equipment, keeping logs, or quietly joking to break the oppressive tension. Others turned to prayer, staring through periscopes at nights of endless gray sea, wondering whether the next hum of a propeller would herald salvation or destruction. The human element of warfare had shifted. Survival was no longer about skill alone, but about how well one could endure the invisible predator lurking beneath the waves. The introduction of acoustic torpedoes immediately forced a tactical rethink. For years, U-boat commanders had relied on coordinated wolfpack attacks, shadowing convoys in patterns calculated to maximize surprise and efficiency. They moved with precision, using hydrophones to detect targets, then communicated via encrypted channels to summon fellow submarines into a deadly net. Speed, silence, and coordinated timing were their allies. Now those same tactics became liabilities. Every engine sound, every coordinated maneuver risked drawing the attention of a torpedo that could track and strike with precision. Captains found themselves forced to reconsider fundamental strategies. Should submarines remain in wolf packs or operate independently to reduce acoustic signatures? Could convoy attacks be conducted at night, at greater distances, or from unexpected angles? Each decision carried enormous weight. Miscalculations could result in the loss of men, vessels, and strategic advantage. Escort vessels and aircraft further complicated the equation. The Allies had integrated the deployment of acoustic torpedoes with improved sonar detection and aerial reconnaissance. Convoys could now deploy countermeasures in layers. Decoy sounds, evasive maneuvers, and rapid engagement by patrol aircraft carrying Fido torpedoes. For U-boat commanders, the ocean no longer offered the sanctuary it once had. Engagements became high-stakes gambles where even a perfectly executed approach might be punished by a homing torpedo silently tracking from above. German naval doctrine, once confident in the supremacy of the submarine, was under pressure to evolve. Tactical manuals were revised mid-war, emphasizing erratic maneuvers, silent running, and convoy avoidance whenever possible. Yet the sheer unpredictability of the acoustic torpedo meant that no maneuver could guarantee safety. The hunter had become the hunted, and the familiar Atlantic theater had transformed into a minefield of uncertainty, where every decision carried the possibility of sudden death. The acoustic torpedo was more than a weapon. It was a technological marvel born from necessity. Conventional torpedoes relied on preset courses or manual targeting, leaving submarines a window of evasion. By contrast, the Mar-24 Fido and its British counterparts represented a seismic shift. The weapon could detect, track, and follow its prey autonomously, relying solely on sound. Passive hydrophones within the torpedo translated the vibrations of propellers into directional guidance. The torpedo would correct its course, turning toward the source of the noise, adjusting in real time to a submarine's maneuvers. Early tests confirmed its precision. Submerged U-boats attempting silent running or erratic movement were still located and destroyed. The simplicity of its principle belied the complexity of its engineering. Sound isolation, battery life, hydrodynamics, and the ability to differentiate target noise from background oceanic hums all had to be perfected. This technological leap gave the Allies an unprecedented advantage. Air-launched deployment meant that submarines could be engaged even when surfaced or submerged, without the attacker exposing itself to counterfire. Fido was effectively a self-contained hunter, capable of patrolling vast stretches of ocean and finding submarines that had once believed themselves invisible. It was a weapon that combined human ingenuity with mechanical autonomy, a terrifying foreshadowing of modern guided systems. The German High Command, initially unaware of the full scope of acoustic torpedo deployments, soon faced a leadership crisis. Reports from U-boat captains described sudden, inexplicable losses. Experienced commanders who had navigated the Atlantic for years found themselves questioning tactics, strategies, and doctrine. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat arm, recognized the psychological impact almost immediately. Submarine crews were demoralized, fearful of engaging convoys that had previously been vulnerable. Donitz initiated rapid reviews of submarine procedures, demanding modifications in evasive tactics and silent running protocols. Yet even seasoned leadership struggled against an invisible threat that defied conventional naval wisdom. Letters and reports from the front lines conveyed desperation. Evasive zigzags, sudden dives, and erratic course changes often failed to prevent destruction. The leadership challenge was compounded by intelligence gaps. Without knowledge of the Allies' acoustic program, German commanders could only speculate about the cause of these losses. The strategic implications were profound. Decisions once guided by confidence in stealth and precision now carried heavy risk. Training programs were adjusted, technical upgrades considered, and riskier patrols sometimes curtailed. For Donitz, the emergence of acoustic torpedoes was not merely a tactical problem. It was a fundamental threat to the Kriegsmarine's dominance in the Atlantic. Every loss eroded morale. Every unexplained destruction challenged the authority of command. From the Allied side, the deployment of acoustic torpedoes was carefully planned and executed. Naval strategists understood the dual effect: immediate destruction of enemy submarines and long-term psychological warfare. By turning the U-boats' most trusted tactics against them, the Allies forced the Kriegsmarine into constant defensive postures. Air crews trained rigorously in the deployment of Fido, learning to calculate drop distances, torpedo depth settings, and target acquisition timing. Intelligence officers correlated reports from aircraft, ships, and signals intercepts to optimize deployment patterns. Every successful strike validated months of research and investment, demonstrating the effectiveness of a weapon designed to think in the absence of direct human control. This approach was not just technological, it was strategic. Allied leadership understood that even a few well-placed acoustic torpedoes could disrupt U-boat operations across entire patrol zones. Convoys could move with greater freedom, supply lines were protected, and German submariners were forced to expend energy and morale, avoiding the new threat. In essence, acoustic torpedoes became both a physical and psychological weapon, reshaping the dynamics of the Atlantic conflict without requiring traditional large-scale engagements. The integration of intelligence, engineering, and operational planning exemplified the Allies' growing mastery of undersea warfare. Where German submariners had once dictated the tempo of battle, the introduction of a listening weapon allowed the Allies to regain the initiative. The ocean itself became an instrument of strategy, translating the science of sound into a tool of war that redefined the rules beneath the waves. March 1943. The North Atlantic was a frozen expanse of darkness and storm. Yet beneath the waves, the war had entered a new, invisible dimension. U-575, commanded by Captain Helmut Rosenberg, prowled the convoy lanes near the Azores. For weeks, they had tracked merchant ships, shadowing them with the confidence of experienced hunters. But this patrol would be different. Somewhere in the icy waters, the Allies had deployed a weapon that listened, that hunted in silence, that struck without warning. On the morning of March 22nd, the first encounter occurred. Patrol aircraft from an American escort carrier detected a submerged U-boat and released a single Mark 24 Fido torpedo. Rosenberg's sonar operators reported a faint whistling sound approaching, but it was too late. The torpedo adjusted its course, closing in relentlessly. U-575 executed an emergency dive, zigzagging in hopes of evasion. The torpedo's guidance system, attuned to the vibrations of the propeller, ignored the evasive maneuvers. Seconds later, the torpedo detonated against the hull, throwing water and steel into the freezing Atlantic. The attack did not immediately sink the U-boat, but it left Rosenberg and his crew shaken, aware that they had faced a weapon unlike any before. Within days, more reports arrived from the U-boat fleet. U-boat commanders described torpedoes appearing from nowhere, tracking targets that had assumed complete stealth. One German log described a wolf pack attempting a coordinated night attack on convoy ONS-5. Despite careful planning, several submarines were struck by acoustic torpedoes launched from aircraft patrolling above. Ships that had seemed safe under the cover of darkness were suddenly vulnerable, and the wolf pack's coordination faltered. Panic and confusion spread as commanders realized that no depth, no silent running, no experience could guarantee survival. The psychological effect was immediate. Crew members reported sleepless nights, hands constantly gripping rails, listening to every creak of the submarine. Even seasoned captains, those who had survived months of Atlantic patrols, began questioning traditional tactics. Silent running, once a trusted defense, could not protect against a torpedo that actively hunted by sound. Training manuals were updated mid-patrol, and orders emphasized erratic maneuvers and convoy avoidance whenever possible. Yet the very tactics designed to evade detection often drew the torpedo closer, as the noise of evasive engines and mechanical activity created new acoustic signatures for the weapon to follow. The first confirmed losses demonstrated the deadly precision of acoustic homing. U-575 survived its initial encounter but required extensive repairs. U-558, less fortunate, was destroyed within minutes after failing to evade a Fido torpedo dropped by a patrolling B-24 Liberator. The destruction was total, leaving no survivors in some cases. Reports to German High Command detailed the terror aboard the vessels. Explosions without warning, torpedoes that seemed almost alive, and the realization that the hunter had become the hunted. The Allies, meanwhile, monitored the effect with meticulous attention. Each successful engagement provided data to refine targeting algorithms, drop patterns, and depth settings. The intelligence gained from early encounters allowed the deployment of torpedoes to be increasingly precise, creating a feedback loop that heightened their effectiveness. By April 1943, acoustic torpedoes had begun to systematically disrupt U-boat operations along the convoy routes between North America and Britain. Perhaps the most striking moment of this period occurred during the battle surrounding Convoy HX-229. German submarines attempted a coordinated assault, confident in their usual tactics. Yet Allied patrol aircraft, equipped with Fido torpedoes, intercepted multiple U-boats before they could reach the convoy. Some were destroyed outright, others damaged, forced to abandon their mission. Captain Rosenberg's logs note the eerie precision. The torpedoes tracked our engines as if they were sentient. No maneuver could shake them. We were no longer hunters, only prey. The encounters in early 1943 revealed a stark reality. Acoustic torpedoes were not just a tool. They were a paradigm shift. They exposed the vulnerability of even the most skilled crews and challenged the very doctrine of submarine warfare. For the first time, German commanders faced a weapon that could punish mistakes instantly, regardless of experience or preparation. The Atlantic, once a domain where U-boats held near total control, had become a lethal proving ground for a technology that combined precision, autonomy, and psychological terror. The stage was now set for the peak of these engagements, where acoustic torpedoes would decisively alter the course of the Battle of the Atlantic and test the Kriegsmarine like never before. Spring 1943. The Atlantic was a theater of tension, fog, and relentless waves, yet the fiercest battles unfolded unseen beneath the surface. German U-boats, once the unquestioned predators of the convoy lanes, now confronted an enemy that required no eyes, only ears. Acoustic torpedoes had transformed the rules of engagement, and the Kriegsmarine was facing its most dangerous period in the Battle of the Atlantic. The convoy battles of March and April became a grim proving ground. Convoy ONS-5, a formation of more than 40 merchant vessels escorted by destroyers and corvettes, was shadowed by 10 German submarines. The Wolfpack tactic, honed over years, promised devastating results. Yet, as submarines approached the convoy under the cover of night, Allied aircraft deployed Mark 24 Fido torpedoes from above. Submerged U-boats detected only the faintest hum of these instruments before they locked onto the sound of propellers. One by one, the submarines were struck. U-538 attempting a close approach attack, was destroyed within moments. Survivors reported that the Torpedo seemed to maneuver with intent, following the vibrations of the submarine through the water as if it anticipated every evasive action. U-594, later in the engagement, attempted a series of sharp zigzag maneuvers and sudden dives, yet the acoustic Torpedo corrected its trajectory each time. Within 10 minutes, the vessel was ruptured by the explosion. For the German crews, the ocean had become a predator, and their once trusted tactics offered no protection. The loss of U-boats during these encounters shocked the Kriegsmarine. In a single week, multiple submarines were sunk or damaged beyond immediate repair, marking a significant shift in the strategic balance. Admiral Donitz noted in his command reports that the introduction of a new weapon of war has caused unexpected casualties among our boats. Measures must be taken, but the scope of its effect is unprecedented. Communications within the U-boat fleet expressed fear and confusion. Experienced captains admitted that evasive techniques they had relied upon for years were ineffective. The psychological toll was as severe as the material losses. From the Allied perspective, these engagements validated the strategy and technology behind acoustic torpedoes. Aircraft crews meticulously recorded each attack, observing that the torpedoes performed with remarkable autonomy and precision. Even when U-boats attempted deceptive measures, reducing engine noise, shutting down non-essential equipment, or deploying decoys, the torpedoes often maintained tracking. Tactical analysis confirmed that the weapon's passive acoustic guidance allowed it to adapt to varying depths, speeds, and evasive patterns. The Allies had created a force multiplier that was both lethal and demoralizing. One of the most dramatic instances occurred in May 1943 near the Azores. A wolf pack of 8 U-boats attempted to intercept a heavily escorted convoy. British aircraft, equipped with acoustic torpedoes, launched multiple attacks. U-89 and U-201 were destroyed outright, while U-752 was damaged and forced to retreat. The engagement illustrated a terrifying new reality. German submarines could no longer dictate the tempo of battle. Every approach carried risk. Every maneuver could trigger destruction, and the very ocean itself seemed to conspire against them. These losses had strategic repercussions beyond the immediate destruction of vessels. Submarine operations slowed, wolf-pack coordination became erratic, and morale plummeted. Experienced captains, who had once approached convoys with confidence, now hesitated, fearing that any action might expose them to the silent, omnipresent threat of an acoustic torpedo. The Allies, meanwhile, gained not only tactical victories but strategic momentum, securing convoys and tightening supply lines that had been under constant threat. By mid-1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a turning point. The German Navy, previously dominant under the surface, was being systematically neutralized by a combination of innovation, intelligence, and psychological warfare. Acoustic torpedoes had transformed the nature of submarine combat, making stealth less reliable, strategy more hazardous, and survival uncertain. The hunter had become prey, and the ocean itself had become an arena in which technology dictated terms, not skill alone. As the tide shifted, the consequences for the Kriegsmarine were profound. Submarines lost, morale shattered, and strategies forced to adapt under pressure, setting the stage for the aftermath of this technological revolution beneath the waves. By mid-1943, the full impact of acoustic torpedoes on the German Navy had become unmistakable. Losses of submarines continued at an alarming pace, and the operational calculus of every U-boat patrol had shifted dramatically. Between March and June alone, Allied records indicate that over 30 U-boats were destroyed in the North Atlantic, with acoustic torpedoes accounting for a growing percentage of these losses. Vessels once considered invincible beneath the waves were now highly vulnerable, their stealth neutralized by weapons that tracked their very heartbeat through water. The psychological toll extended beyond individual crews. Commanders reported heightened anxiety and fatigue across the fleet. Letters from officers expressed frustration and fear, describing men on edge from the moment the engines start, and highlighting the constant tension that eroded both morale and decision-making. Even Donitz, normally a composed strategist, acknowledged that confidence in U-boat supremacy had been severely shaken. Training manuals were rewritten mid-war, emphasizing evasive maneuvers, silent running protocols, and avoidance of known patrol areas. But these measures could only partially mitigate the new threat. Strategically, the Allies had effectively neutralized a key component of German naval power. Convoy losses decreased as acoustic torpedoes forced U-boats into more conservative operations. Wolf packs, previously capable of coordinated assaults, became fragmented and less effective. The Atlantic, which had been a testing ground for the effectiveness of German submarines, increasingly became a domain dominated by Allied initiative. The combination of aircraft-deployed torpedoes, intelligence coordination, and improved escort tactics reshaped the undersea war in favor of the Allies. Reports from intercepted communications and surviving U-boat logs illustrate the scale of disruption. Submarine patrols were shortened or rerouted. Engagements became riskier, and commanders hesitated to attack even high-value targets. The presence of acoustic torpedoes forced a re-evaluation of every mission. Losses that might previously have been attributed to bad luck or poor maneuvering were now understood as the result of technological superiority, a weapon that required no human intervention once released, and that relentlessly sought its target. The broader implications extended beyond individual battles. The Kriegsmarine was compelled to accelerate research into countermeasures, including noise-generating decoys and mechanical devices designed to mislead torpedo guidance. Yet these measures were reactive, improvised responses to a weapon already in widespread deployment. The Allies, by contrast, continued refining and expanding the use of acoustic torpedoes, integrating them with broader anti-submarine strategies that combine intelligence, reconnaissance, and rapid deployment. By the summer of 1943, historians would later recognize this period as a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. German submarine effectiveness was diminished, operational losses spiked, and morale among crews hit historic lows. Acoustic torpedoes had introduced a new form of warfare beneath the waves, one in which technology could dominate tactics, and where the hunter could become the hunted with terrifying efficiency. The war in the Atlantic had irrevocably changed, setting the stage for the eventual decline of the U-boat threat and the secure passage of Allied convoys that would sustain the European war effort. From the ocean depths to the command offices in Berlin, the consequences of this new weapon reverberated across the Kriegsmarine. The stage was now prepared for calm reflection on what these events meant for naval warfare, technology, and the human cost of innovation. The Atlantic of 1943 was no longer simply a stretch of open water. It had become a proving ground for human ingenuity and technological evolution. Acoustic torpedoes had demonstrated that warfare was not only a contest of courage and skill, but also of adaptation to innovation. The hunter had become the hunted, and the silent, invisible ocean had turned against those who once ruled it. For the men of the Kriegsmarine, the experience left a lasting mark. They had faced a weapon that listened, that sought them with relentless precision, and that rendered traditional mastery of the waves insufficient. Fear, fatigue, and uncertainty became as much a part of their daily reality as navigation charts and engine readings. Yet amidst the terror, there was also resilience. The relentless drive to adapt, to survive, and to understand a force that seemed almost alive in its persistence. Strategically, acoustic torpedoes shifted the balance of power beneath the waves. Allied supply lines were secured, convoy operations became increasingly effective, and the dominance of the U-boat was finally challenged in a manner that combined intellect, technology, and psychological insight. This weapon exemplified a broader lesson of the war, that innovation, applied with foresight and precision, could alter outcomes as dramatically as any fleet maneuver or battlefield engagement. Beyond immediate military consequences, the story of acoustic torpedoes illustrates the evolving nature of warfare itself. Conflict was no longer merely a measure of brute force or bravery. It was a contest of ideas, engineering, and the capacity to exploit unseen advantages. The silent hum of a torpedo in the depths became a symbol of this transformation, a reminder that technological ingenuity could tip the scales in ways that were sudden, terrifying, and irreversible. And yet, the human dimension remained. Each vessel lost, each crew member terrified or killed, reminds us that behind every innovation is a human cost. The oceans were never abstract battlefields. They were theaters of courage, fear, and endurance. The emergence of acoustic torpedoes reshaped history not only through strategy and technology, but through the lives they touched, the fears they provoked, and the lessons they left for generations of naval warfare to come. In the end, the story of a torpedo that listened is not only a story of destruction, but also of the relentless march of innovation, the fragile balance of human courage, and the unyielding depths of the Atlantic that bore witness to a war transformed.